This episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k is sponsored by Carnage Con and their King of the Mountains GT. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the past week of competitive play and talk about what's currently winning. This one is for the weekend of July 25th and 26th, 2026, and this is a big weekend because it is immediately after the first large balanced data slate that we've gotten for 11th edition 40k. Now, I am happy to report that tons of events have immediately adopted these new rules. Obviously, there were a couple of important bug fixes and some very needed balance fixes in there, and so we can start to get a look at what the metagame is going to look like post those updates. I did not include in this video any events that did not use the new updates, so if you are looking for a specific result in here and it is not represented, that would be why. But with that out of the way, let's talk about exactly what is doing well, and we can see from our metagame breakdown that a couple of the top factions, despite receiving massive nerfs and mechanical changes in the latest update, are still showing up. Orks are still at the top, proving that it wasn't all about Green Tide and their tactical brigade combination that they played previously. New combinations of Ork detachments are seeing a lot of play, and we'll talk about the most popular one of those today. Orks took down the Boise Cup 40k Brawl, as well as went undefeated with an X0-1 result both at the Forge Fire Open, which saw a draw in the semifinals, which put both players into X0-1 territory, and at Northern Maelstrom. Necrons also continuing to do well, but with a shift away from their older builds that were focusing more on long-ranged attacks and more towards destroyer-heavy builds. Those took down the Tactical Chili Championship as well as Bolt Gun Tactics GT, with a more classic Awakened Dynasty taking down Protect Ya Neck. Space Marines also showed up in a big way this weekend with a bunch of different factions seeing play. That included Dark Angels, which took down the Battle of the East Tactical Chili Championship, as well as Northern Maelstrom with an undefeated result, X0-1. We also saw a couple other Tyranid factions we'll discuss momentarily. Thousand Suns going undefeated at the Boise Cup, taking second place at that event with a 5-0 record, but losing out just barely on tiebreakers to Orks. We also saw them undefeated at the Forge Fire Open. Leagues of Votann had a pretty good weekend with a lot of undefeated results using draws. The Hobby Henchman July GT was won by Leagues of Votann, who went 4-0-1, ended up with a draw, but remains the only undefeated player at that event. They also saw an X0-1 result at the Boise Cup. One thing I will mention is that I think that the high scoring of 11th edition does tend to make these draws more common. These are natural draws, by the way, everyone we're talking about here. These are not like WCC differential scoring draws. These just occurred the normal way. Tyranids also saw one. They did take down the Malaysia National Finals, but they also went X0-1 at War in the Wastelands. Drukhari took down the Chimera Gaming and Whitby Summer GTs. Chimera Gaming GT was taken down by a friend Scary over at Scardcast. Blood Angels won the Rearguard Renegades Summer Open, and they were not the only Space Marine chapter to take down a GT. We also saw Salamanders taking down the Northern Maelstrom, and Space Wolves also going undefeated, taking first place at the Chimera Gaming GT that Scary also did well at. Adepta Sororitas with a fascinating list over at the Warzone Dragoon GT. Adeptus Custodes took down the Brewhammer GT9. Chaos Space Marines proving that despite massive nerfs, that faction still has a lot to play for, taking down the Winter Clash. And Chaos Demons, last but certainly not least, undefeated and first place at War in the Wastelands. And we'll talk about those lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video has been sponsored by Carnage Con and their upcoming miniature gaming tournaments. Carnage Con is an annual convention held in the gorgeous Killington, Vermont, this year occurring October 16th through 18th, 2026. And while Carnage Con has a ton of events for you to participate in, over the last couple of years, it's also been expanding into Warhammer offerings. That includes the first annual King of the Mountains GT, full-size GTs for both Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar. Both of these will be 5-round events for up to 32 players at the absolutely gorgeous Killington Grand Resort. So if you want a nice fall getaway punctuated by absolute carnage and a 5-round Warhammer GT, check them out in the links down in the video description.
You can self-register on the event's Best Coast pairing page, but keep in mind that you'll have to buy a pass from the Carnage 29 official tabletop events page in order to secure your spot.
And get them now because at the time of recording, they are filling up. So again, mark aside your weekends, October 16th through 18th, 2026, and revel in a little bit of carnage. Now, starting with our current metagame frontrunners, let's move on over to the Boise Cup and talk about a couple of the top placing lists there. This was an 80-player event that ran 5 rounds and ended with 2 5-0 players as well as 1 4-0-1. So lots of undefeated players at the end of this one. We're going to start with Damian Owen, who ended up taking first place using Orks, and what is likely to be the new metagame for the faction of Freebooter Crew and Mordecai. Now, we've actually discussed this combination of detachments on the channel previously on previous episodes as a bit of a secondary build to the Green Tide Tactical Brigade that was popular at the very launch of the edition. The synergy between those detachments was incredible, and these ones have good synergy, maybe not quite as consistent or as overbearing as Green Tide plus Tactical Brigade, but most of the Orc players who were doing well ended up playing it. Now, the big thing here is that Mordecai gives you access to some pretty solid enhancements, including things like Dead Shiny Shooters to improve your attack volume with rapid fire. You can then also use long uncontrolled bursts to use those rapid fire to punch through cover. And then Freebooted Crew gives you access to relatively consistent sustained hits, as well as a lot of really good just generic improvements. Things like the Crump and Run stratagem to move after an opponent falls back from you. Deck Fraggers to absolutely demolish enemy infantry units, especially large squads in Horde armies by giving all of your ranged weapons blast, and most importantly, Grab and Bash, which allows you, if you start in range of your chosen loot objective, to gain the WOG effect, which then also gives all your ranged weapons assault. And in your movement phase, you can use Boarding Rush to then give you an auto 6 advance to give you an advance and charge. So that allows you to essentially WOG with select units earlier than normal, and especially with the expanded size of the objective markers in 11th edition, and the requirement in a lot of cases for units to go to those objective markers either to see through them because they are terrain features or to perform secondary or primary actions on them. It gives you easier access to the effects of those loot objectives more consistently. So you get good WOG bonuses from both detachments and good shooting bonuses from both detachments, as well as a couple of powerful melee buffs from Freebooted Crew. Now in this case, we're playing Gazgul Thraka as the Warlord alongside a big unit of Mega Knobs. We're taking Zodgrod Wartsnaga as well as a Gretchen unit with the Dead Shiny Shooters upgrade that gives them rapid fire again. That allows you to compound that attack volume again with Deck Fragas to absolutely demolish large infantry units, especially alongside Zodgrod Wartsnaga's +1 to hit and wound for all attacks, which affects their ranged and their melee attacks. It didn't really matter so much that it affected their ranged attacks previously. It was just kind of a cute thing. But now that they can compound all of these different bonuses, they can actually do some pretty serious damage. Now, he also then had a big mech with shock attack gun with the Git Spotter Squig to give his unit just a permanent ignore cover. He's attached to a Tank Buster unit alongside a Pain Boy. I had to do a little bit of, I guess, army list reconstruction here. The army list that was posted originally in the event was actually illegal. It had unattached support characters. I believe that what the army was going for was dual attaching a second big mech with shock attack gun alongside Dead Shiny Shooters to apply that rapid fire to the rest of the unit, alongside a second Pain Boy. That wasn't included in the list, but I think that's the only way it becomes legal, I believe. We then have Boss Snickrot, as well as Wazdak Gutsmech for a little bit of melee counterpunch. We have 2 big mech Daka rigs for some additional shooting, a pair of trucks, as well as a flash kit unit, again, with Dead Shiny Shooters. We love that enhancement. 15 points for rapid fire on your Orc teams is pretty awesome, plus a Gretchen unit for utility. This isn't the first time we've seen similar builds to this list, and it's certainly not going to be the last time. Orks have certainly shown that they have a resilience in the number of builds they have available, and I don't know how much they would expect to see changes before their new codex comes out. So I think it will probably be that we see lists like this, and there are a couple other Bully Boys builds that are also seeing some play that will probably persist up to the launch of their new codex. Now we're going to stick with the Boise Cup for a moment to discuss Thousand Suns and what that faction's doing these days. Ryan Brown also went 5-0 at that event, took second place, very close race between Ryan and Damien for first and second, just came down to a couple points on tiebreakers. In this case, Ryan was playing a Rubric Phalanx. This is the Rubric and Scarab Occult Terminator detachment that we saw play a lot towards the end of 10th edition. This gives you access to things like Revenge of the Rubric, which allows your Scarab Occult Terminators to fire back, or Rubric Marines even, for that matter, to fire back when any of your Psychers are killed, which includes the Psychers inside their own units. This allows you to set up situations in which you're effectively doubling your damage, coming with the Terminator squad, shooting your opponent, placing your Sorcerer in the front of your allocation group in response to an attack, losing the Sorcerer, and then firing back. The other thing, too, is that you can combo it because they are stratagems used in separate different phases with Rapid Ingress. Another common strategy is to leave one of those units out off the table, and then when your opponent comes in to attack one of the Scarab Occult units, you have another one Rapid Ingress next to that unit. If they attack their original target, the second unit will shoot them and do some really serious damage. So these guys are pretty obnoxious. In this case, we're taking 3 Scarab Occult Terminator bricks with attached Terminator Sorcerers. We also have enhancements on all of them, Risen Rubric on one of them to give one of these units Infiltrate, Arcane Thralls on another one, and the last one with Lord of the Rubric. We have a Forge Fiend with 1 Ectoplasma Cannon on the head mount weapon, I guess, as well as arm-mounted Hades autocannons, which, because of their high attack volume, now that their AP characteristic isn't quite so hampered by cover, these things are becoming more and more popular for a variety of Forge Fiend builds. Not really a weapon loadout that we saw typically in the past, but it does look cool. We also then have 2 units of Sekitar robots, only 2 of these in each case, for some infiltration and early game skirmishing. For utility, we have a Zangor unit as well as 2 units of Zangor Enlightened. Honestly, cool to see Thousand Suns still doing well after what felt like really massive nerfs to the faction. But realistically, a lot of the nerfs were pointed very specifically at Hexwarp Thrallband, plus a lot of its combos, and a lot of these lists have moved back to older varieties of Thousand Suns composition. We even saw a lot of things like Grand Coven doing well this weekend for this faction. Now let's move on over to Auckland, New Zealand for the Tactical Chile Championship. This is a 46-player event that ran 5 rounds, and it saw both Dark Angels and Necrons do fairly well. We're going to talk about this Necron list at 5-0 in first place, and I think a pretty solid direction for the Necron faction as we move forward. Previously, Necrons were focused very heavily on Awakened Dynasty, which used a lot of reanimation mechanics and character regeneration, which has been nerfed in the latest update. So Necrons have fallen back quite a bit on some of their older builds, and one of those is Cursed Legion. Now, speaking personally, I also think that this is one of the coolest builds that Necron has. It's extremely interactive, and it has massive damage output in very specific circumstances, which is really cool. In this case, we are running a huge focus on Locust Destroyers, including 18 Locust Destroyers, all of them attached with Locust Lords. Now, the big thing here is that Locust Destroyers obviously will get access to hit rerolls if they target an enemy on an objective. As we just discussed with the Orc list, being on an objective is a state that is much more frequent in 11th edition than it has been previously. So as long as their target is the closest one, they'll get reroll once. If they're on an objective, they'll get full rerolls. The Locust Lord gives them improved critical hits, 5-up criticals. They have lethal hits baked in, so the play pattern typically is that you will fish for lethal hits when firing into heavy targets. However, you also now can get sustained hits from Necrosaur Amintar. So you can be 5-up critical, lethal sustain, and because of Cursed Legion, you can also be +2 strength, so they're strength 8. So the addition, transition, and the application of Cursed Legion has kind of offset a lot of the downsides of this unit. The other thing that they would run into is shooting into cover. They would get all these hit rerolls, so their accuracy was very strong regardless. However, they would fire into enemies that effectively had an AP reduction effect on them. So their AP2 mass firing weapons would be reduced to AP1. You wouldn't really do that much. If you get Armor of Contempted, your opponent's saving on their base save, and a lot of your damage wouldn't go through. That's no longer the case anymore. Now you don't have to worry about cover. You're hit rerolling anyway, so even if you're shooting into cover, it's not going to do that much. And a lot of your hits are going to end up being lethal. You're high strength anyway, so you can push through even T12 targets on 5s. So they're basically good at shooting almost everything in the game, which is pretty cool. Now, in this case, we are also attaching this to Sky Shroud Spearhead, which gives you some absolutely massive buffs for these mounted units. That includes a reactive move for mounted units, D3 plus 3. You also get -1 to be wounded from evasive protocols for a command point against enemy shooting whose strength characteristic is higher than your toughness. So strength 7 or higher for a Locust Destroyer unit, which is a lot of the anti-heavy infantry 3 damage weapons that we see making their way through the game. So these combination of detachments add these just massive damage buffs for Locust Destroyers, as well as good survivability buffs for them from Sky Shroud Spearhead. Now, we're also taking a couple of upgrades on these units. 2 of the Locust Destroyer units have the Deepening Madness upgrade, which gives them Assault baked in, so they can also improve that targetability with their weapons, the ability to target the specific units they gain rerolls against by being able to move more quickly. That also allows them to get around hidden by being able to move forward more easily. It's very handy. We then have a unit of Locust Heavy Destroyers with a Chronomancer. These guys with Enmitic Exterminators. You kind of need these because sometimes the Locust Destroyers themselves can fall down against big, heavy, like massive units of guys that the Locust Destroyers don't necessarily have the attack volume to get through. They do have a lot of, critical hits, and they shoot 18 times if the full unit gets to shoot. However, you're not killing like 20 models if they have a bunch of defensive buffs on them, and so you do need the Enmitic Exterminators to be able to do that. The Chronomancer, importantly, gives them a 5-inch normal move after attacking in the shooting phase, so the important thing here is that these guys can either push forward to get within their rapid fire range in order to unlock their full potential, but they can also just tow into terrain features, get their shots into a utility unit or something, and then jump back outside the terrain feature in order to protect themselves. We have a Catan Shard of the Void Dragon for a little bit of counterpunch against melee targets, Imhotep the Stormlord to help you fuel all of these stratagems, Necrosaur Amintar, as we said, incredible combination alongside those Locust Destroyers. We have a pair of Canoptek Reanimators, a Scarab Swarm unit, a Ophidian Destroyer unit, as well as a unit of 3 Scorpek Destroyers, just for another little infantry unit that can act as another melee answer. Despite the fact that Necrons did get hit so hard, they do have a dizzying array of available builds. We have things like some versions of Star Shadow Arsenal. We have some of the super heavy builds that run things like Pharaon's Armory. There's a lot of ways to play this faction beyond just the Awakened Dynasty sort of reanimation spam that we saw very popular at the launch of the edition. And so I'm excited to see what Necrons come out with moving forward. Now, moving on from there, let's head on over to England for the 28-player Hobby Henchman July GT. This one ended up being won by Luke Honeywell, who went 4-0-1, undefeated, but had a draw on his record. Still took first place on tiebreakers, however. In this case, he was playing Leaks of Votann and a Hearthband detachment. Kind of a classic composition that we saw a ton of in last edition. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I feel like we're talking about a lot of compositions from 10th edition these days, but not playing any of the Hearthguard Covenant, Needguard Oathband, or Mercenary Oathband kind of stuff. Instead, we are playing just straight up Hearthband, so improvement to call Einherjar Hearthguard and Uthar the Destined units. You get reroll 1s on all of your Votann units, targeting the closest eligible target, and if you are one of the above keywords, you also get +1 AP. You can combo that with a bunch of really powerful stratagems, 4+ invulnerable save, in shooting or fight phase for any of your Call or Hearthguard units to protect them with their good armor saves, but relatively poor invulnerable saves. We have Unyielding Aggression, which allows your units to fall back, shoot, and charge, as well as Fury of the Hearth Hearth to give yourself sustained hits 1 and +1 strength to allow those Einherjar Hearthguard units to drop out of reserve, and then I do some pretty serious damage. Now in this case, we're bringing a duo of Einherjar Hearthguard. This includes a call with Bastion Shield to reduce the AP characteristic of nearby enemies when they shoot at him. He's in a 10 model unit of Einherjar Hearthguard with plasma guns, I should mention. We have another call with Iron Skein to improve his wounds characteristic. He's hanging out with another 10 Einherjar Hearthguard. These guys also with plasma guns. Then we have another call, this guy with a teleport crest, interestingly, and 10 Hearthkin Warriors. Now, a really curious combination here is that we can actually use materialization matrices, which allows you to 6-inch deep strike, but doesn't require that you are a Hearthguard, just requires that you have deep strike and are in reserve. So because the call is a teleport crest, when he's joined to a unit that gives the whole unit deep strike, you're able to 6-inch deep strike these guys to provide OBSEC or high OC where you need it, which is kind of neat. These guys are equipped with ion blasters, as well as auto rifles and rotary cannons. Importantly, the unit is a call unit, which means it also gets that +1 AP bonus that the detachment gives you as well. Now from there, we also had a bunch of independent characters, Uthar the Destined for some free stratagems, a pair of Arcanist Evaluators, so we had some access to Lone Operative, a Memnir Strategist to sit in the back and generate some yield points, as well as a Capricus Carrier, a Sagittor, probably to split the Hearthkin Warriors in half, alongside a pair of Brokir Thunderkin units, Graviton Blast Cannons on those guys, a pair of Chthonian Berserks with Concussion Mauls for some anti-vehicle work, a trio of Hernkin Pioneer units, all of those with high LAS rotary cannons. That's going to be good for skirmishing with enemy screens, as well as generating yield points early by taking opponents' objectives. You definitely need to be able to push forward and take the expansion objective in order to consistently generate yield points so that you can fuel your transition in future turns between your two dispositions, your hostile acquisition or fortified takeover. In addition, there are a couple ways to spend yield points inside this detachment other than that. Lastly, we also have a Hernkin Jaeger unit to go inside that Capricus Carrier. Now, what's interesting about this is that oftentimes in these detachments, what we will be playing is, or focusing on, is a way to initiate skirmishing early so that you can get something that your Einherjar Hearthguard can sort of sink their teeth into on the turn that they drop in. I think in this case, what it's going to be is a lot of the Hernkin Pioneers, which are not the easiest thing in the world to kill. They don't die to a stiff breeze. Well, we also have units like that drop Hearthkin Warrior unit that can just drop in 6 inches away from you and shoot you with their heavy weapons, which is kind of cool. And you get that for significantly cheaper than you would an entire additional unit of Einherjar Hearthguard. So for basically like 100 points, if we're only committing a combat squad, the Hearthkin Warriors can drop in and instigate that fight for very cheap. Put a lot of pressure on your opponent, potentially score some objectives early that require you to move to your opponent's side of the table, and then allow you clear some screens and allow you to bring in the Einherjar Hearthguard. Kind of an interesting list, definitely a difference than we've seen from this detachment in the past. Now that moves us over to Battle of the East, where we're going to begin our long discussion about various Space Marine factions. Hope you guys are ready to talk about Space Marines for a while. Dark Angels had a pretty good weekend this week with undefeated results, the biggest one at the 96-player Battle of the East. This was won by Josh Roberts, which is, I guess, a little interesting, given its proximity to a recent balance update, but he is playing a combination that is tried and true. This is the combination of Company of Hunters and Dark Flight Pursuit, a huge focus on a Ravenwing keyworded unit, especially the ability from Company of Hunters to give the army advance and shoot, as well as your mounted units advance and charge. Now, in this case, we're running Azrael with a unit of Inner Circle Companions for a bit of a mid-board presence. We have Samael inside a Ravenwing command squad alongside an Outrider squad. Now, this is a bit of an interesting composition. There is an indication, of course, inside the faction pack that you Ravenwing command squads are meant to attach as support units. However, they never actually change inside the Munitorum Field Manual, which governs exactly what leader keywords a unit should have. Obviously, it's supposed to have a support, but currently, that's like a sort of permissive thing. You do have to ask if you can do that, because they haven't actually put it in the rules. They've just written that they are gonna change it in the rules, basically. It's kind of a mess, to be honest. Not the first time they've messed something up in the Munitorum Field Manual, and I'm sure it won't be the last time. We just have to wait for an update to that document. But when that ends up being the case, we're going to be able to put those units together. Samael grants his unit mobile. He gives you advance, shoot, and charge, but it doesn't make that much of a difference because you already get that from the rest of the detachments. However, you previously, there was a restriction against epic heroes joining in alongside enhanced units. That's been lifted, so now Samuel can jump in with the Raven Command Squad. They have recon hunters, so they're going to be able to scout at the beginning of the game, and they will provide that scout to everything in the unit. So you can have this unit that pushes forward really aggressively. It shoots okay. It's got 3 plasma talons and Samuel's plasma gun, and then the twin bolt rifles and the outriders. But the big thing is they charge, and then they all get +1 damage from the outrider attacks. So we're getting a ton of 2 damage AP1 from the Outriders. We have 2 damage devastating attacks from the Ravenwing Command Squad. That pushes the Ravenwing Champion to damage 3, and then it also puts Samuel to damage 3, and Samuel's also sustained hits 2. So if you can do that and target into your Oath target to fish for the sustained hits, this unit actually hits like kind of a truck, and it's not the most expensive thing in the world. Outriders actually have gotten sequential discounts, so they're only 70 points for the base unit. You're paying about 220 for the attached characters, so sub 300 points, and you're getting a unit that's going to scout forward, move 12, advance, then shoot, then charge, and basically instigate the fight on your opponent's side of the table. Pretty gross unit there. We also have Lionel Johnson, an Intercessor squad, a pair of Landspeeders, alongside 3 Landspeeder Vengeances with Light Knight Forged Batteries to give them rerolls on their attack volume. Pretty nice. We have, interestingly, another unit of Ravenwing Black Knights, just a nice little utility squad that can run around, do a little bit of damage against other utility. Big thing about these guys is that they can fire their Plasma Talons with more abandon, because they can't actually die to their own Plasma Talon overcharges. In previous editions in 10th, they would kill themselves if they ever overcharged their Plasma and failed the test. Now they just take a damage, so they can overcharge those and probably go into small units like Space Marine Scouts, for example, start to clear them out between shooting and a charge in order to disrupt your opponent's scoring. They're OC2 as well. There's an OBSEC stratagem inside a company of hunters, so you're able to use them to secure objectives. Very handy. We can use a Ravenwing Dark Shroud to protect the Bikers as well as the Landspeeder Vengeances with stealth, alongside 2 Scout Squads and a Stormspeeder Thunderstrike to help with anti-vehicle rolls. This guy can shoot in, give +1 to wound to all of those little plasma shots and the Landspeeder Vengeances, most importantly, so they can knock down even heavy targets relatively consistently. I have a sneaking suspicion Dark Angel's already being a high-performant sub-faction for Space Marines previously, and kind of inexplicably getting buffed with a bunch of these data sheet and points value and mechanical changes that we're probably going to see a lot of Dark Angels over the next couple weeks. I do think it is emblematic of that Josh Roberts has elected to take them right after they did get buffed, so that's cool, I guess. Now we're going to stay in the United Kingdom for the 25-player Rearguard Renegades Summer Open. This was won by Josh Trurin, and talking about Blood Angels, another relatively high-performant sub-faction over the course of the weekend for Space Marines. They had a lot of really good results, 1 actual undefeated, which we'll talk about now. This is a new combination combining together Angelic Host and Vengeful Host, 2 detachments that explicitly buff your jump pack infantry. Angelic Host allows your jump pack infantry to up down and gives them bonuses when they arrive from reserve, and Vengeful Hosts give them reroll 1s to hit any turn they make an ingress or a charge move. Now that's relatively easy because you have things like Descent of Angels, which lets you 6-inch deep strike your jump pack units, and you also have Death from the Skies that allows you to advance or fall back and charge those units, so you can consistently get that buff. Now in this list we were playing Lamarties with a big unit of Death Company Jump Pack Marines, a pair of Chaplains alongside 5 model Death Company Jump Pack squads. We had a Captain with Jump Pack with Visage of Death. This forces Battle Shock checks on everything, excluding monsters or vehicles, and engagement with him when he charges. He's inside a Sanguinary Guard squad. Sanguinary Guard are huge in this detachment because not only are they 2+ weapon scale and they can get reroll 1s to hit from charging thanks to Vengeful Host, but Unbridled Ardor inside Angelic Host allows you to unlock full hit and wound rerolls for Sanguinary Guard units that target a unit that destroyed another unit. So you use the stratagem as soon as one of your units is destroyed, that then turns on rerolls for your Sanguinary Guard. So Sanguinary Guard can be extremely high output if you feed something that's relatively low cost to your opponent first. Now, on top of that, we're also bringing another jump pack captain with Orks Bane. This is from Vengeful Host and gives you an additional option for your melee attacks. It's not an extra attack weapon, but allows you to swing with a cleave attack if you want to. He's inside a unit of 6, a Sanguinary Guard. I should mention as well that the Sanguinary Guard are all equipped, in this case, with a combination of blades and spears for the lance or a bonus AP. The 3-model unit is equipped entirely with blades. We then have an Intercessor Squad, a pair of jump pack assault intercessors. I like this inclusion here as well. A pair of Inceptors. One of these is equipped with plasma exterminators, one of them with assault bolters. These are just 3-model units. Again, these are guys that can jump in. They can get those reroll ones to hit. They can relatively consistently knock out opposing utility units, and then when your opponent kills them, you just unlock Unbridled Ardor for your Sanguinary Guard that are going to follow up. We have a Scout Squad as well as a Suppressor Squad. Now, the Suppressor Squad is interesting, especially alongside the Inceptors. All those units can uppy downy with the Pawn Wings of Fire ability from Angelic Host, so you can pick up to 2 units into reserve and then ingress them on your next movement phase. This also includes your first turn, so if you go second, your Inceptors and stuff can be dropping in on your opponent from the bottom of the first turn, and those Suppressors give you a very inexpensive unit that you can utilize alongside this. Not to mention the fact that you can oftentimes drop them on the upper levels of terrain and gain Plunging Fire, so they actually offset their relatively low base ballistic skill and can do some relatively consistent damage, as well as put their -1 to hit on enemies on top of that. Kind of a cool build. I do like to see these novel compositions together. It is, and especially these 2 detachments who work so explicitly well together. Just a bunch of them both with a lot of overlapping bonuses to your jump pack infantry, which is extremely strong. Now, moving over to one of the larger events of the weekend, the Northern Maelstrom held in the US. This one was won by Aaron Peshek running Salamanders. Salamanders did get some big changes, especially to Librarius Conclave and how they interacted with that detachment, but it turns out that isn't really stopping them from just setting people on fire still. This was playing the classic combination of Forgefather Seekers and Librarius Conclave. Now, unfortunately, the list did not include character attachments inside it, which is technically illegal, although I believe that all the characters could be played by themselves, so maybe they were just on their own, although I doubt it, sincerely. So I've taken my best guess at their character attachments here. We do have Adrax Agatone. There is a unit of Blade Guard veterans inside the army. I imagine that he attaches into them to give them wound rerolls. Awkwardly, they don't really benefit him anymore. In the past, it used to be the case that you would take Adrax so that he could gain reroll 1s from the Blade Guard veterans, but they don't do that anymore. They get +1 to hit. So he's just hanging out, I guess, and getting rerolls to wound, which is sweet. We also have a Gravis Captain. He has the Immolator enhancement for +1 a shot on your torrent weapons. He's going to go into a unit of 6 Flame Storm aggressors. He can also discount the Immolation Protocol stratagem, so they can do mortal wounds. Pretty cool. We have a Terminator Librarian with Celerity, so we give advance, shoot, and charge, as well as Vulcan Heston. Now, that Terminator Librarian is jumping up into a Terminator Squad. This is a pretty classic inclusion in this attachment nowadays, to just act as a bulwark that can do some pretty serious damage in shooting. Once it jumps within 12 inches of you, you can shoot your Oath target, get +1 to wound, get rerolls to hit, so you can push through cover even, and then you can also get up to strength 5 thanks to the detachment ability that allows these Terminators to actually shoot units to death relatively consistently. We have on top of that a pair of Eradicator squads, just 3 Eradicators in each of those, a pair of 5-man Infernus squads for utility. We have a pair of Scout squads for some additional scoring potential, and then the bulwark of the center arm of the army is going to be a pair of Land Raider Redeemers. Interesting to see the Librarius Conclave builds kind of evolve past what are the classic Fusillade combo, Temporal Corridor kind of stuff that they played with previously. A lot of that stuff has been massively depowered, although interestingly, I think there are other builds that are possible for Fusillade that allows it to be played in a more interesting variety of places rather than almost explicitly just devastating wound guns. And that does make it a little bit more interesting. So cool to see Librarius Conclave still getting a little bit of work. Now moving on over to the 73-player Chimera Gaming GT. This event ended up being won by Dan Bruce playing Space Wolves, who took them to a 6-0 record. This is the combination of Legends of Saga and Song alongside Saga of the Great Wolf. So we can use the benefits from Legends of Saga and Song to buff up our Wolfguard Terminators, then attach characters into them, especially Logan Grimnar, who of course can empower our Saga of the Great Wolf. In this case, we are running a Wolfguard Terminator unit with Arjak Rockfist, these guys taking Fierce Example. That's the enhancement for +1 toughness to a Terminator unit, bringing it up to toughness 6. And then they also have that contextual -1 to be wounded, meaning that unit is very difficult to take down. We have a Terminator Captain with Grimnar's Mark, which allows him to attach into Wolfguard Terminators, as well as Logan Grimnar with another unit of 10 Wolfguard Terminators. That brings our total to 30 Wolfguard Terminators. We also have Bjorn the Fell-Handed, a combi weapon lieutenant with Chariots of the Storm that allows you to redeploy units back into reserve, as well as a Land Raider Redeemer and an Infiltrator squad. That gives you a huge amount of pressure in the center of the battlefield that the Terminators can then capitalize on. The Land Raider Redeemer can help clear out things in the center of the battlefield or force your opponent to overcommit to destroy it to prevent it from scoring the midboard. Then you can rapid ingress your Terminators in, counterattack, and basically just dominate the center of the battlefield. Once those guys are stuck in with +1 toughness and potentially -1 to be wounded, they are not going anywhere fast. They get all the benefits from the Saga of the Great Wolf detachment ability. That can be things like reroll charges, or even potentially sustained or lethal hits in melee, and you get to duplicate that selection thanks to Logan being in the army. Overall, pretty classic build for Space Wolves in 11th edition, and it's cool to see that faction continuing to do well. Now moving on over to Malaysia for the Malaysia National Files at Zunobi Studio. This event was taken down by Siafik Saharudin, who was playing Tyranids and a cool combination of Assimilation Swarm and Talons of the Norn Queen. This is kind of composed around the fact that Norn Assimilators do in fact have the Harvester keyword, so they synergize with all of the benefits from Assimilation Swarm. That includes being able to heal themselves and other things around them, getting 4+ Feel No Pain on objectives that you control. Lots of benefits for these guys. They can also improve their own damage output, as well as be more flexible with Talons of the Norn Queen. Now in this case, we're playing a Hive Tyrant with a unit of Tyrant Guard. Nice thing about the Tyrant Guard actually is that they give the Hive Tyrant access to hidden, not the fact that it can hide itself. It's a monster, it can't do that. However, if you put the Tyrant Guard inside of a hidden terrain feature, and then the Hive Tyrant behind the terrain feature, you can actually sort of like purchase for yourself a little bit more board presence than the Hive Tyrant would normally have, which is nice. The Tyrant Guard are also 4 wounds apiece, they're hard to kill, and you can regenerate them back to the unit once they're dead, so that's neat. We have a 20 model unit of Hormagaunts with a Tyranid Lashwood Prime with Parasitic Biomorphology that improves their strength and attacks characteristic once they destroy enemies. The Hormagaunts are here because we can use the Harvesting Regeneration to put 3 models back into an Endless Swarm unit, so we can keep that Hormagaunt unit topped up and potentially even steal people's objectives away with them. We have a Horospex double Maleceptor to take the midboard, 2 Norns, 1 Assimilator and Norn Emissary, the Assimilator with Synapto Prescience for a 4+ invulnerable save. I always felt that the downside of these guys is that they have a 2+ requisition cap, so their requisition or their cost increases when you bring 2 of them or more. So it is difficult to take more than just the 2 normal Norns. You start to pay 20 to 30 points more per model after you take any more than the first 2. And I wonder how this list would change if you ended up being able to take more of them for less expensive. We have 2 Psychophages in there as well. Again, Harvesters that are not the easiest thing in the world to kill. They have a Feel No Pain. They're only 100 points. And they have some anti-psyker technology, which is actually very helpful against all the Librarius Conclave and Thousand Suns that's running around right now. And then we also have a trio of Pyrovores. 1 individual Pyrovore and 1 unit of 2 of them. The unit of 2 is nice because they can push forward onto an objective. You can lose a Pyrovore and then regenerate it back, which is actually kind of a lot of value. It's 5 wounds of infantry dropping back into that unit. And there are Harvesters as well, so they can kind of just passively do that regeneration. In this case, we were playing the Take and Hold Force Disposition, but Assimilation Swarm does have access to priority assets. I would be interested to see if there is a build for Tyranids that does utilize priority assets, because it is one of the more consistently scoring force dispositions inside the game right now. But in any case, nice to see Tyranids at the top end here with some interesting builds. Now, that wasn't the only Tyranid list that went undefeated this weekend. We also saw Tyranids go X-0-1 at the War in the Wastelands GT. This was a 40-player GT being held in Albuquerque. We did have Chaos Demons taking first place, which we'll talk about later in the video, but Marcel Parra also went almost a perfect record, actually had a 91-point draw in the semifinals against the Eldari. Kind of an insane finish for this list. A 91-point draw is weirdly common in 11th edition because of how effective scoring is. In this case, Marcel was playing a combination of Ambush Predators and Vanguard Onslaught, two detachments that overlap and provide a lot of overlapping buffs for things like Lictors and Von Rheinsleepers. In this case, we're running a pair of Broodlords with Gene Stealers. These guys are great for early game disruption. They can run across the middle of the table with Scout. They can get pretty decent charges into your opponent if they have any infiltrators or scouts themselves. Gene Stealers can basically force them to deploy back or hit them on turn 1. And in some cases, if you get lucky with a large charge, you can scout them up the table, run them up the table, charge, hit the unit, and then slingshot the Broodlord into a second unit, 2 for 1 your opponent, and then push the line of engagement back on their side of the table while denying their control of their expansion objectives. The nice thing too about 2 units as well is that you can stack them in your deployment zone thanks to the new scout rules, where you can have units that deploy before the first turn begins in your deployment zone after everything else is resolved, including your other scouts. We have a Tyranid Prime with a last rip of the Hormigaunt squad for some OC2 disruption, a hyper-adept Ravener unit with another unit of Raveners attached, so we have a rapid ingress threat that can blow up heavy vehicles. We have a Neurotyrant with a Zoanthrope unit. These guys are very expensive these days, 200 points for the Zoanthropes plus 130 for the Neurotyrant. They typically will require use of up-down stratagems over the course of the game to keep themselves relevant, which means that they do end up being kind of pricey for what they end up doing, but it does give you a pretty solid shooting battery that you can threaten your opponent with seeded broods on turn 1, because you can bring them out of reserve. In the early game, you can actually theoretically basically tell your opponent, hey man, if you put your stuff out in the open, I can shoot it immediately because I can pay a CP to count it as round 2 for bringing the Zoanthropes onto the battlefield. Oftentimes you won't do that, but your opponent does have to respect the threat, which does give you a lot of board control. We then have Death Leaper, a pair of Lictors for your utility, a Biovore because we are playing reconnaissance, so we want that Biovore to be able to get to table quarters, different areas of the battlefield to score those reconnaissance points, in addition to the Swarm Lord, who's kind of an auto-include these days for Tyranids. He gives you command points so you can use all the incredibly expensive stratagems inside Vanguard in Onslaught. The downside, of course, they have a good reactive move, but it costs 2 CP, so oftentimes you're going to be burned on command points unless you have this guy. The other thing, too, is that because the detachment is largely melee-focused, having Swarmlord to mess with your opponent's interruption stratagems in melee is always good. He also has fallback and charge in this detachment, which is definitely not terrible. That guy does not want to get stuck down in a protracted melee. He wants to continuously be charging into new enemies in order to apply his Twin-Linked attacks exactly where he wants them to. Pretty cool to see more Vanguard Onslaught doing well. It's been my favorite detachment over the course of the edition so far, and I put a ton of reps into it up until this point. Now, we took a brief detour away from Great Britain, but don't worry, we're going back because we're going to go to the Whitby 40k Summer GT. This was a 26-player event that was won by Tom Hampshire running Drukhari. This included a classic combination of an Exhibition of Slaughter and Sky Splinter Assault. I think the basically expected combination of detachments for playing Drukhari these days. This included an Archon with 10 Incubi and the Nightmare Shroud, another 5 Incubi with Drazar, Lady Malice with another 5 Incubi, so a lot of that melee counterpunch that can benefit from lands from Sky Splinter Assault. We then have Lilith Hesperax in a Witch Squad, in addition to a Succubus with Periaptic Torments and another Witch Squad, so 2 instances of anti-Overwatch effects. A pair of Witch units, just 10 models, that can probably Combat Squad into Venoms. Speaking of which, we do have 3 Venoms to Combat Squad, 3 of those Witch units, 2 Raiders to carry either the Witches or the Incubi around. We then have a Mandrake Squad for utility, a unit of 5 Hellions, a unit of 3 Reavers, and 2 units of Scourges. Now, these are heavy weapon Scourges. One of them was equipped with all Dark Lances. The other one, probably to shave some points here, was equipped with all Heat Lances, which does have a higher potential damage as long as you can get those Scourges up close and personal to their target in order to benefit from their massive Melta value. Now, that wasn't the only undefeated Drukhari list this weekend. Ridvan Martinez, aka Scary from Scardcast, a friend of the channel, also went undefeated, and I would be remiss if I did not include his list in here as well. He was also playing Spectacle of Slaughter in addition to Sky Splinter Assault. However, he had a little bit of a refocusing, less on the melee attacks and a little bit more on tanks and ranged weapons. So here's the list right now for your perusal, and then we'll move on. And that moves us over to Adepta Sororitas at the 28-player Warzone Dragoon GT. This event was run in Germany and ended up being won by Max Danner, who was playing Adepta Sororitas and a very interesting composition of Adepta Sororitas. This is a combination of Penitent Host and Sacred Champions. So Penitent Host is the Repentia and Penitent unit detachment for Adepta Sororitas. It gives you access to 3 Vows of Atonement that you select at the start of each battle round. They either make all your Penitent models faster, give them +1 to attack and strength when they charge, or give them a 2+ fight on death effect. So you can use these Penitent units to trade, especially with lightly armored enemies, relatively consistently. We can also use Catechism of Divine Penitence to attach a Canonist, Palatine, or Minister Priest into a Penitent squad, which we have done in this case with a Palatine providing her buffs to a Repentia squad, which is helpful because those Repentia get reroll hits on the charge, so that unit's actually relatively high output. Now, the other combination of this is with Sacred Champions. This is the 1-point Sacrosanct focused detachment that gives you access to kind of a 1 detachment point version of Champions of Faith. It gives Celestian Sacrosancts a permanent +1 weapon skill and ballistic skill characteristic, and gives you some good bonuses for them. That includes things like +1 attack and strength when your Sacrosanct units are selected to fight. You can also gain advance, shoot, and charge with those units, or fall back, shoot, and charge as you will. Now, in this case, we were running more of Involve with a Paragon Warsuit squad. These guys are equipped with heavy bolters to add some pretty solid long-range shooting. Obviously, full hit rerolls and +1 to hit and wound against vehicles allows those heavy bolters to do some pretty serious damage, even against heavily armored targets, especially now that you're not worrying about the AP reduction from cover. We have Astrid Thurga and Agathe Dolan attached with a Hospitaller with Perfervid Haste. Again, utilizing the ability to attach characters into units that already have enhancements these days. Perfervid Haste gives the entire unit +1 movement, so you're going to be able to combo that with the Advance and Charge, make that unit relatively quick. The Advance and Charge you get for a command point from unflinching determination inside Sacred Champions. Astrid Thurga and Agathe Dolan is an interesting combination here. They do give their units devastating wounds, so altogether, especially when you have a stratagem to increase the attack volume of a Celestian Sacrosanct unit, these ladies can put out quite a bit of damage if you're just putting a high volume of relatively mid or low strength attacks. In this case, we are taking Hallowed Maces on them, so we have a lot of 2 damage attacks, and while the AP characteristic isn't that great, obviously devastating wounds on those will offset that quite a bit. We then have a Canoness alongside another Hospitaller inside another unit of Celestian Sacrosancts. No upgrades there. Junith Erowita alongside a Hospitaller alongside an additional unit of Celestian Sacrosancts. Junith obviously can protect them a little bit more with her defensive buffs. We have a Palatine, as I mentioned before, with Catechism of Divine Penitence to allow it to attach into a Repentia squad to provide its lethal hits to those ladies. All of these can be improved by the Triumph of St. Catherine being nearby, which gives you an additional +2 to your movement, as well as +1 to your advance and charge rolls. So, doing the math here, if we have a move 6 units of Sisters that is beginning a movement next to the Triumph of St. Catherine, they go to move 8. If they have the Perfervid Haste enhancement, they go to move 9. They advance, they immediately add d6 +1 for an average of about 14 inches of movement. They then charge, also at +1 for an average charge roll of about, I would say, 8 inches typically. So you're looking at an average, not maximum, but average threat range of 22 inches off of that one Sacrosanct unit. You also get similar levels of alacrity out of your other units as well, especially your Penitent units. We also have a Sororitas Rhino to deliver them, so you can add a 3-inch Disembark on top of that as well. And for a little bit of damage output, we have a Castigator. Very interesting build, very differently than a lot of Adepta Sororitas builds, where typically you would be taking a lot of individual units to generate Miracle Dice and trade with your opponent. This is basically like 5 giant units between 3 units of the Celestian Sacrosancts, the Morphin Vol and her friends, in addition to the Palatine and the Repentia. There's a couple other things in there, Triumphant Catherine and a Castigator. But that's basically it. Very little in the way of utility, very little in the way of trading pieces. We are just flooding the board with Sacrosancts. An absolute insane list. And it's cool to see Adepta Sororitas moving away from their Army of Faith builds. I do feel like it was maybe a little bit heavy-handed of a nerf to detachments like Army of Faith that we saw in the latest update, but it's cool to see that changes elsewhere in the faction are having a positive impact for this faction that otherwise has been performing very poorly over the initial stages of 11th edition. Now, sticking with the Imperium flavor for a moment here, let's talk about some Adeptus Custodes and head on over to the Brewhammer GT9, a 40-player event being held in Scotland. This one was won by Larry Martin, who is playing Adeptus Custodes, combination of Lines of the Emperor and Might of the Moritoi. Played exclusively for its Force Disposition, by the way. We're just taking Take and Hold, so we can play a lot of aggressive primary missions, or you just have to run to the middle of the table and blow your opponent off the objectives to take them and, again, hold them, as the name suggests, because that's basically all the army wants to do. It is including 3 Dawn Eagle Jetbike Shield Captains and 9 Virtus Praetors with Hurricane Bolters. That's most of the army. These guys obviously incredibly strong inside Lines of the Emperor if they are firing at enemies from outside of range of the Lines of the Emperor debuff aura. If they're outside 6 inches of each other, they get +1 to hit and wound, which means they can fire at a unit in cover. Their twin-linked weapons are getting +1 to wound, so they wound on 5s at worst with rerolls. Probably better than that, though, especially if they're shooting infantry. And then they still retain hitting on 2s because their ballistic skill is going to reduce, but their hit roll is going to counteract that. So, all these guys are looking pretty good in the shooting phase. They also charge and fight like Custodes with Lance, so they hit pretty good in the fight phase as well. Now, the other part of the list is 14 Alaris Custodians, 2 units of 6 and a unit of 2. We do get Unleash the Lions inside Lines of the Emperor, so we can drop these guys to split them in a bunch of different units in order to actually hold those objectives once you've taken them, the second part of the primary disposition. We also have a Venatari Custodian unit, so we can rapid ingress a second unit. So ideally, I think in a lot of cases, these guys are going to start on the battlefield or in reserve. You're going to threaten a rapid ingress early, push forward with these Dawn Eagle Jetbike Shield Captains, and blow away screening units. You can probably 2 for 1 in a lot of cases with those guys. They go in, they shoot a unit to death, they charge, kill another unit, move away, and set themselves up to do it the next turn with their move after fighting. Then, if your opponent runs out of screening, you can then drop in the Alaris Custodians and either clear additional infantry units or hammer blow your opponent to death, split them later on in order to go complete your objectives. A very creative list. We've seen a couple lists like it, but never ones that have, I guess, just taken the theme to heart quite as literally as this one. A lot of times we're also seeing a couple of additional splash inclusions like Dreadnoughts or Custodian Guard units. This is literally just Terminators and Dawn Eagle Jetbike guys, and that's it. Leave the rest at home. Now, this is a very international episode of Best Armies in 40k this week because we've moved to Malaysia. We're also going to hop on over to go to South Africa and discuss the Winter Clash 2026. This was a 23-player event, ended up being won by David Holmner, who is playing Chaos Space Marines. Chaos Space Marines get massive, massive debuffs in the most recent update. However, David's still making it work with a very interesting combination of detachments, Murder Talon Raiders, and Veterans of the Long War. In this case, he elected to continue to take Huron Blackheart and the Masters of the Maelstrom alongside a chosen unit, even at their newly upcharged points value. That unit is just so valuable. It gives you a solid brick of wounds in the center of the battlefield. They have reactive move, they have mortal wounds, they have regeneration. They just have so many things going for them. They have additional OC in an aura. It's crazy strong. We then also have a Chaos Lord with Jump Pact with the Pact of Cursed Pinions that allows him to enter a Warp Talon unit. We then also have a Warp Smith with the Eye of Abaddon. This gives him a command point regeneration when you destroy your focus of hatred. That's the Oath of Moment that Veterans of the Long War get. A good combination alongside stuff like those Warp Talons that really do have to kill whatever they charge. So those guys being able to rocket across the table turn 1, blowing up a unit with rerolls, lethal or sustained hits, whatever they packed for, plus the attacks from the Chaos Lord as well, and then hopping into reserve is very helpful. We have a standard Chaos Mob, Cultist Mob, as well as a Chaos Biker Squad, as well as a ton of back backline shooting. Again, the shooting also benefits from those rerolls from Veterans of the Long War, so those are also going to be relatively effective in this detachment. We're taking a Chaos Predator Destructor, as well as 1 Vindicator, 1 Defiler, this one equipped with Excruciator Cannons, Heavy Reaper Autocannons, and a Battle Cannon on the turret mount, alongside a Raptor unit for utility, a Possessed unit, and a Red Corsair squad for some early game skirmishing. Very cool to see a little bit of experimentation inside Chaos Space Marines. I know that the majority of their most competitive builds have been nerfed. They had a lot of infantry-focused builds in detachments like Renegade Raiders or Huron's Marauders. Those have been depowered with changes to Chosen. A lot of their vehicle builds have also been depowered with changes to Predators and Defilers. So it is a tough spot to be for Chaos Space Marines, but I do think that there is still builds that are viable inside their codex if you dig deep enough. And that moves us over to Albuquerque, New Mexico for the final event of the weekend, the War in the Wastelands GT. This was a 40-player GT. It ended up being won by John Camacho playing Chaos Demons. There was Tyranids at X0-1 at the second place finish. In this case, John Camacho was playing a combination of Blood Legion and Cavalcade of Chaos. Now, this is just weird movement tricks, the army. You do have some classic things like move through terrain features, both in Cavalcade of Chaos and inside Blood Legion. You have Advance and Charge from Blood Begets Skulls, but the most important thing is that Blood Legion gives you a surge move anytime anyone comes close to you. This includes any type of movement that ends within 8 inches of a Legionis Demonica Khorne unit. So this includes things like fallback. This includes things like, I believe, ingress moves that come in closer than 8 inches, so like a 6-inch deep strike, for example, could trigger a surge move. And with extended engagement ranges, that means that any of those triggered moves could potentially end with you engaging the enemy. With the new way surge moves work as well, there was a weird interaction with Blood Legion back in the day where you could surge towards the enemy, but you could only ever engage the thing that fell back. So the common counterplay was that you just put a different unit in between the Blood Legion unit and the unit that was falling back, and then there was no way they could surge into the thing that just fell back from you. It was actually a really bad rule. The new version in 11th edition, though, incredibly strong. In addition to that, you also have Fool's Flight, which allows you to charge enemies that fall back from you in your opponent's movement phase. So it's as long as they end within 6 inches of a Khorne unit after a fallback, you can declare a charge. That means it's going to be most likely a 6-inch charge to get back into them, and because you're using a stratagem, you don't have a reroll. However, a lot of Khorne units, you get +1 to charge, so it's probably a 5-inch charge. It does cost you 2 command points, but basically allows you to heroically intervene back into melee without your opponent being able to really react to it. They can't shoot you, for example, unless they themselves have close quarter shooting. And this will automatically trigger if you are in base contact with a 6-inch moving enemy. The average move of models in all of Warhammer 40,000 is 6. That is, the vast majority of infantry units are that movement characteristic or lower, which means any of those units are automatically going to trigger this if you engage them and then fall back from them. So this can create this awkward situation where your opponent doesn't want to engage you. They don't want to move too close to you. If they do, you could engage them, and if that ends up being a protracted fight that you then fall back from, they could keep engaging you. And so these Khorne units can just remain in melee for multiple turns. It is a little random. Of course, you are rolling charges, you're rolling surge moves, and you're hoping for the best there. But if you're able to spread that threat around the board enough, all you need is a couple of those moves to trigger for you to be able to make massive gains on the table. Kind of an insane combination of detachments. And in this case, John was playing a Skull Master with Brazen Maw. This is a +2 charge enhancement for that character. He's inside a Blood Crusher unit, 6 Blood Crushers. They do have an Instrument of Chaos for +1 to charge. So these guys are a total of +3 to charge. If they just drop out of reserve 8 inches away from you, they're making a 6-inch charge out of reserve just by themselves. If you do trigger Fool's Flight on them, that's going to be a 3-inch charge for them to re-engage you. Because they charge, they then inflict impact mortals again. So this unit, absolutely horrifying. We have Karanak inside a big unit of Fleshhounds, 10 Fleshhounds for that guy. Karanak's actually kind of an awesome inclusion just for his raw stats. He never really wanted to be included in Fleshhounds in most detachments, but obviously he can make a lot of use of these reactive moves to spread out the massive volume of his Fleshhound squad across a large area, and then hopefully be able to slingshot himself into his prey targets and be able to generate a lot of value that way. We have a Bloodthirster with Fury's Cage. This is an enhancement that allows the bearer to take D3+1 mortals when it's selected to fight to get full hit and wound rerolls until the end of the phase. Bloodthirsters being famously inaccurate or inconsistent when it comes to their melee damage output because they have high value attacks, but the problem is that those attacks are, hitting on 2s and winning on 3s, and you don't have any rerolls, except unless you use this stratagem, obviously, or this enhancement. Bloodthirsters usually die when they commit anyway, so taking D3+1 mortals isn't the biggest deal, and you're going to ensure that you blow up whatever you charged. We then have huge buffs from 2 Randmasters on Blood Throne, so we can further improve our damage output. We have a bunch of additional Blood Crushers, 1 unit with Apocalyptic Steeds, 1 unit with no additional enhancements, just the 6 Blood Crushers themselves. We have a Bloodletter unit, we have 2 units of Fleshhounds for utility, and we have 2 Skull Cannons for some backline shooting. Now, unlike Shadow Legion, we don't have advance and shoot on these guys, so they're not quite as flexible as we saw in some of the Shadow Legion builds that were playing them. However, Skull Cannons have a bunch of attacks in melee. It's good to force battle shock checks on people, especially if you're trying to maintain control of objectives or you're trying to force mortal wounds onto them thanks to Shadow of Chaos. So they just tend to make sense. You also get a bunch of benefits and synergies between them and all of the mounted synergies that both Blood Legion and Cavalcade of Chaos have. So they're always nice to include. Kind of an insane list, to be honest. I definitely understand how this can be very powerful. There are obviously a lot of weaknesses for playing all Khorne units, but once you get stuck in and you try to engage this with another melee army, for example, one that is trying to play that more aggressive game plan, and you simply just get charged first by the units you're trying to interact with because they just surge move into you. It's not actually a charge, but it's almost a charge. And then when you fall back from them, they do it again. It's incredibly difficult to deal with. And if they can construct a situation where they alpha strike you, they can basically jail you into your deployment zone and make it impossible for you to interact with them without giving them those surge moves. And if they roll the requisite distance to engage you in the surge moves, they can take something like a gun line and just lock it into sequential combats until the game's over. Absolutely crazy. Very cool to see some more build variety inside Chaos Daemons. Chaos Daemons have been incredibly diverse this edition, and I'm excited to see more weird combinations come out. And with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether that's over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing. Don't forget to check out the Carnage GT. Links in the video description to get your tickets for that. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and as always, have happy wargaming.